my wah-wah pedal. So that just gives you kind of
Ah,
a little.
yeah, that was amazing. Thank you.
Hey, hey,
Welcome, Tracy Silverman.
thanks. Good to see you, Michael.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here today. This conversation. Wow, that was a great setup. Oh, you know what? Hold on. There's something going on. You know what's going on? I'm
Okay.
hearing the YouTube broadcast in the background.
Ah, a, a tape delay.
A tape delay.
This used to be a form of music concrete.
I think I'm good now. I closed the other. Are you there?
I'm here.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, obviously. Phew, I think we're still on YouTube. We should be live on YouTube too. I couldn't
Cool.
get to Facebook, but we are live, which is, always,
It's tech, man.
technical stuff is, though I can't even use the wah-wah pedal. So, and you get to yours and you do a great job at it. So, and it's so today's Music on Tux Sundays is basically a conversation following up on our podcast.
Yes.
And the podcast is now up on YouTube. And I really feel, and I'm learning so much from you.
Oh, thank you.
Like from that podcast and having enrolled in your program, uh, it's giving me a whole new, since we spoke, uh, my interpretation of like classical music has changed. Like I think I texted you about Shostakovich Quartet
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Romanian folk dances, Bartok, yeah, that's changing. And I'm looking back at these um, old videos I made, and I was a strum bower internally, but I didn't know how to get it out.
How to manifest it.
And you are doing it for me. So
Well,
thank you for
good.
that.
As I know, even as a kid and as a young adult, when I was studying music and stuff, the stuff that I was most attracted to musically was often the stuff that had more guts to it, kind of like folk music. Like I really got into Romanian music and gypsy players,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they play with an intensity that makes classical music just seem pale by comparison. Like if you, there was a famous Roma violinist named Dinicu,
Oh yeah.
uh, right?
Dina- Yeah. Yeah.
And who wrote that horror staccato that
Right.
Heifetz made
Yeah.
famous,
Dinaku
right?
Heifetz. Yeah.
Right, badu, badu, taka, 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 taka. And we all know Heifetz's version of that, which is amazing and astounding, up bow and down bow staccato and stuff. Um, but when you hear Diniku play it, it just makes your hair stand on end.
Mm.
It's like it just has this intensity and this rhythmic vibrancy that is almost on the verge of being vulgar. It's like so, oh my God, it's almost, it's so emotionally direct and viscerally like captivating.
Wow.
And that
How
was the
how
stuff.
did is that on YouTube? Yeah. How did you see that?
I had a friend at Meadowmount. I went to Meadowmount, which was Galamian's,
Yeah.
concentration camp,
Yeah.
and
Right.
which you went to as well, or
I
no?
know. I didn't do Meadow
Okay,
Mount.
okay.
Yeah.
And and I had a friend there who had all of these cassette tapes from Romania, and that's how I heard this stuff.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is so cool.
Yeah, all those
You know,
guys, they
but
play with an intensity that it's like they have, blood, like they just killed something. It's like, oh my
yeah, and
God.
that's what that's what music ought to be. I mean, when you really think about it, you mentioned classical music. I mean, whoever came up with that title kind of
Yeah,
put a big stigma on us,
it's very
and then
academic word.
oh, then you got to be like a statue.
Yes. You
Oh,
think of
classic.
classical is like the Greeks, the
I'm
Roman
getting as bad
classical.
as you mocking violinists now.
It's one of my
But
favorite
yeah,
things.
but the one thing when you mention Heifetz and the horror staccato, when you see videos of him doing the downbow staccato, it's like the precursor to Strombowing technique. You know
It's
how
kind of crazy. Though I never realized
do you
this
have a
as a
downbow staccato?
I don't. I never
I,
did, and I have a little bit of an up, but I was amazed to look at his bow hand when he's doing it, and it's something like this.
yep.
It's like what is he doing? It's like straight fingers and like sticking out, and I'm like, how are you even doing that?
Right. That yeah, but everyone has a different kind of
Yeah,
style for staccato.
yeah,
That's probably one of the, in a way, it's a neat part of the violin technique that everyone said, well, it's not necessary or anything and all that stuff. However, in a way, it kind of gets to what you're talking about, that it's like a breakout part of violin technique that's really cool and passionate.
yeah,
And then everyone says, oh, but you don't need it.
yeah, yeah.
But
And
it's
I think it came from those Romanian, Hungarian, what we used to call gypsy violinists. Um, there's just some stuff that they do
yeah.
that you don't really they started incorporating it into classical technique, but I think it really came from this crazy folk tradition of
Mhm.
just wildly virtuosic playing, where they do these. I can't do it, but they do like a big arpeggio, like a 3 octave arpeggio, like
Right.
all just like ricochet,
Wow.
and time it and get the timing of the ricochet timed with their left hand. It's kind of mind blowing, but the effect of it is just like it just makes you do that, which must have been how Paganini played.
Yeah.
He must have just played with an intensity that made people they thought he was
Yeah.
possessed by the devil and all this kind of stuff. And
Well, he was like the first rock star, right?
yeah,
First rock star of the violin.
yeah,
That's what you, yeah.
yeah, and but yeah, that kind of that power, I think, of music, um, is what spoke to me as a young person, and I think that's what also spoke to me about rock and roll. To be
Hmm.
honest,
Yeah.
just that visceral intensity and immediacy, and I think I don't want to overgeneralize about classical music, and I don't mean this to be denigrating in any way, but when things become academic and studied and analyzed and taught in a certain dogmatic way, a lot of that visceral energy and power just somehow gets forgotten or just not as valued because
Hmm.
we're learning how to shift properly and play in tune and get good tones and all of those things that we as teachers try to get from our students, and it's so difficult to play stringed instruments that you need that academic pedagogy and all of that kind of stuff, but the crazy intensity of rock and roll and stuff like
Right.
that has nothing to do with that kind of pedagogy. It doesn't know about that. It
Right.
doesn't
Well,
care.
pedagogy in general, a lot of like a generalization could be pedagogy squelches creativity, even though it can also unleash some because it gives
It
you
de-
more. There's a
it depends
balance.
on how you teach. It
Yeah,
depends on
exactly.
what you're teaching.
Right. Exactly.
Like, if you're teaching improvisation in an inspiring way, that should be, but that's, it's a different kind of pedagogy. The pedagogy of how to hold your bow and how to shift and all that kind of stuff gets down to the mechanics. And I think
Mhm.
it's important for string players to remember that mechanics are important, but they're mechanics.
Hmm.
It's like learning grammar.
Yeah.
First of all, none of us learned how to speak by learning grammar. Not one person ever learned how to conjugate a verb before they learned how to speak, right?
Hmm.
We learn how to speak by imitating and by having something to say. This is one of the most important things that for improvising musicians that there's like, how do I get started with musicians? With improvisation, the first step with improvisation is have something to say. It's like we're going to have a conversation and I have nothing to say to you, like nothing no ideas, and what's the point of just yammering on?
And that's kind of like a common thing with like young or like amateur improvisers
Yeah,
because
well,
I
because
know
we're
what I would start playing a lot and it was I really had nothing to say, but I was just playing.
right, and because you can learn, when you're learning how to improvise, you're learning, okay, how do I play over these changes? Okay, well, I need to know how to play on a G chord, then a D7, and then a
Mhm.
C and an F7 or whatever. And so you're learning the theory of that. What are the scales? What notes are in the chord? What are the chord tones? And how do I play this? And so you end up, students often will end up taking a solo that I call, my students know I call this wandering in the desert. You're playing all the right notes. They're all
Mhm.
chord tones, but none of it is making any real sense or saying anything, communicating any meaning. You're just playing notes that happen to be in the chord,
Right, right.
and that's just not going to. I mean, it may sound pretty, it may
Mhm.
be okay for whatever background music or something, but it's not going to grab somebody's attention and yank their heart out of their chest.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yes.
that only happens when we say when people are inspired, but really being inspired just is just a matter of having something to say, something to communicate.
Mhm. Yeah. We have a lot of people that have
Oh,
joined
good.
our call,
Oh,
which is great.
excellent.
And I want to say your episode, and I do want to open it up.
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
have an
let's do that.
open conversation. And before we go on, I want to mention that you're welcome to take your camera, put yourself on camera, and Mark, if we even want to do a gallery, Mark is our Zoom driver. We could do gallery. However, we are on live YouTube. So you may not want to do that. Just so you
Yeah,
know,
so you
we
know.
are
Yeah.
live right now on YouTube as well, on my YouTube channel. And so we'll be opening it up for questions because I do want to say from your episode, I heard from a couple of my colleagues, right, and friends from when I was in school, and one of them, we had a nice conversation. I haven't really talked to her since Juilliard days. I know she's on the call here, so
Oh,
I
good.
encouraged her to come on the call. And so hopefully she'll have some questions for you about I think we were talking about the ghost notes and stuff like that, and also the difference in vibrato. And then another, and so ironically, the she was a student with Fuchs as well at Juilliard with me, and she studied with your teacher, Lewis Kaplan. So, but then another person got back to me say, "Wait a sec, rhythm." The little short that was talking about rhythm not being in classical music or something like that, being de-emphasized from classical
Yes,
music.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, that got some kickback.
Oh,
And
good.
so and he was a student at Yale, and he knows my teacher Shoko Aki up at Yale really well. So, and he was pushing back against what you were saying, and ironically, right after that, right after we had that conversation, he heard from a friend of his, who's I guess a mutual friend of yours, Sean Harkness. I
Oh,
don't know if
yeah,
you,
I know.
yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah, I know
And
Sean
so he
Harkness.
sent your bowing technique to him, and he said, "Wow, you know, he is the real deal, blah blah blah, or whatever, something to that
Oh,
effect."
nice, nice.
And he also sent me some of his music, which is that he does with Sean, and it's actually gorgeous stuff.
Yeah, Sean's a
So
great guitar player.
so there's so much unfolding from
Good.
your
That's what I think is so important right now in this moment in string playing history, uh, is to have these discussions and talk about it. And if like, feel free to disagree with me. I love that. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
Jewish. I come from a family of where disagreement is our MO. That's how
Yeah.
dinner conversation starts.
Right,
We're
right. I
not
love
afraid
that.
of a little opposition and a little
Good.
discussion because that's how you learn, I mean, my dad taught me that the whole point of an argument, like to argue your case, as in like in court, or in the Greek, I think it was in the Aristotle or Pla- Plato or whatever, is to try to convince each other to take the opposite, like to give an argument that's so convincing that you each take the opposite position. you
Mm,
know so you
yeah.
learn something and are influenced by the other person's argument.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
So
Well,
let's have at it. Yeah, let's open it
yeah,
up.
let's open it up to some questions too. Now I know Mark, if you want to, and if you want to put them in the chat, or if you just want to raise your hand, we could do it that way. There he is, our Zoom
Sure, yeah.
master behind his desk.
Hello. Yeah, I can start us off here. I
Sure.
wanted to start by saying I really enjoyed the episode as a guitarist myself. Just like from that perspective of seeing how you like crush all of the like subdivisions and ghost notes and left hand muting that like is usually you associate with a guitaristic style. I kind of after the episode went on a little bit of a rabbit hole for your strumboing, and like I know very little about violin, but I just found it so engaging and interesting just to see what you're doing, and it's really cool. So I wanted to start by saying that, but also
Thank
us
you.
guitarists love to take violin repertoire and play it. Like guitarists love playing Paganini and
Yep.
Vivaldi and sometimes Bach and stuff like that.
Yep.
But a lot of times we'll add like a lot of distortion or wah or effects and things like that. And one thing I wanted to ask both of you is how you feel about when violinists or otherwise do classical music with all of this overdrive and effects. Do you think that there's a line? It's like if you're playing electric violin and you're doing like rock stuff, that's where the effects and distortion come in? Or would you ever go play like a Paganini piece and throw on distortion and then delay and a wah? You know what I mean? Like, are there classical pieces that you think should stay sacred and like, no, we're not putting effects on these? Or like, would you put a big chorus on and a hall reverb to play a Bach piece? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. Michael, would you like to respond or?
Well, I'm going to leave it to you.
Sure.
I do have one thing though about that Bach thing to allude to, because I've kind of torn apart the chaconne quite a bit and I've done a lot to it. And I was very concerned with when I was interviewing Arnold Steinhardt, who was my teacher, and the chaconne is one of his things that he's taken on tour and has done PowerPoint discussions about, and he's really a true,
Expert. Yeah.
original,
Yeah.
authentic, violinist, Curtis and Guarneri and quartet. But he did, when I mentioned that to him about the chaconne being emancipated, so to speak, he said, "Well, that's the platform that Bach kind of set up for us." So so I think with Bach,
Yes.
that's, and I was relieved, and I definitely feel comfortable with opening that up with Bach. So, yeah,
Yeah.
but
Well,
I'm
I mean,
gonna throw it over to you.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, certainly Bach has been reinterpreted so many ways and for so long, back to the Swingle sisters in the 50s or 60s or something, jazzing up Bach. And because it lends itself so well to jazz, just because the language is so similar in so many ways without going into details, but it just, and the harmony is quite similar. And so it's a very easy transition between Bach and jazz. Um, but more in general terms, to answering Mark's question about classical music in general, and my feelings about that are that I basically think anything is fair game. Any music from the past, I think we as contemporary musicians have the right and if not a responsibility to interpret it any way we like, whether we want to do that in an authentic way and say this is the way this was, as best we can tell, played when it was written. This was, sort of the authentic style, whether it's using Baroque instruments to play Baroque music or what. But that's fine. But I think it's also okay to say, here's how I want to do this on an electric six string instrument with whatever effects are at my disposal. And, we can see that in the way, the Vivaldi Four Seasons have been, reimagined and rewritten, and sometimes close to the original, sometimes very far from the original. I think the only question is, are you doing it with taste or not? Like any other music,
Mm.
is it good? You can do it. I have no problem putting distortion on something that didn't originally have distortion. Uh, but if you're doing it just to be kind of kitsch or, maybe um, rocking the classics in a way that's kind of superficial, to me, that's not, fine. You can do Anybody can do whatever they like. Doesn't mean I'm going to love it. So I have just certain things that I just think are in bad taste. They're
Mhm.
just obvious or cliche or things like that. To me, things that work are things that are original sounding, bring the interpreter's personality. They're doing it because they have something to say. They're not just doing it for the sake of rocking, putting distortion on Bach or whatever. They have something they're trying to say with that, and they're hopefully saying it. And that usually makes for a better piece of music. So that's my opinion, 2 cents. Looks
Thank you.
like we have a question.
Yeah. It's Lauren Garrett, right?
Hi there.
Yes,
Yes, can you hear me?
we sure can.
Okay. Hi.
Hey, Lauren.
Hi. This is really cool, by the way.
Oh,
I just found
good.
out about this like an hour ago, and I was like, oh, I want to be on this. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'll give you just like the broad brushstrokes, lay of the land. I call myself a recovering classical violinist.
Me too.
Awesome. And the thing for me that's true, this is my 30th year of playing violin, mostly self-taught, went through the public school system in the United States. Um, and for classical music, like it was partially, I think, because I didn't have a teacher, but it was also that like the furthest I ever really got with the literature was soloing with like Corelli's Christmas Concerto. Like that was like the furthest that I got. And I'm teaching now. I'm also taking lessons with Katie Glassman through her fiddle school and doing like Texas swing kind of stuff. But what I'm finding is that I haven't landed in the space that I really feel like is the thing that is going to like nourish me and get me to like the next level. I think that was something that I heard you talking about, or maybe I'm thinking of somebody else, but like it's like getting to the next level as a musician. And finding that the next level, like I'm conceptualizing like dirty punk rock violin. I don't know if you're familiar with like early Flaming Lips, but I keep thinking about like what would the song Mountainside sound like if there was an electric violin in it? Or like what would music from The Cramps or Bad Brains sound like if it had an electric violin in it? And wondering if like going like careening off this path of like something with structure to something that like it has structure because it's music, but like it's just like dirty. I'm really curious about your thoughts about those sorts of things and taking things like from this totally like the opposite, diametric opposite of classical
Yeah.
music. And the fiddling genres or the fiddling traditions in general, just any tradition, punk rock tradition. That's my question. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's kind of where a lot of my playing came from, was from rock and roll. Uh, and so, yeah, I think it works great. And basically what I started out doing in my career was imitating guitar players, because those idioms, like punk rock or any kind of rock and roll from the 60s, 70s, 80s, heavily dominated by guitar. Um, and it's really hard to imagine a punk band without a guitar, without a distorted guitar in it. And so I think as string players, the way we sound authentic in these genres is to fit in, which essentially is to sound more like a guitar. Um, and you might be asking, well, why sound exactly like a guitar when there's a guitar there? Why not just have a guitar instead? Um, and it's a valid question, but I think electric violin can do things a little differently than guitar. We can sound like a guitar, but we can sound better than a guitar sometimes. It's different than a guitar. We have bows. We can just do different things because we're tuned in fifths. We're going to play things differently. The runs are going to be different. But I think having that general sort of guitar approach works better than a classical approach, with a clean sound with a lot of vibrato. Now, there are certainly plenty of examples of electric violinists who played with a clean classical kind of sound in rock and roll. I'm thinking of guys like Jerry Goodman from Mahavishnu, um, guys like that. Even Jean-Luc often played with a quite clean sound with a little bit of phaser on it or something. And there were times when he was using vibrato more freely than at other times in his career. But I just think that the violin sounds more organic to it if we sound more or less as close to a guitar as we can get. And that's what I spent a lot of my career doing, and that's what a lot of strum bowing is based on, is the rhythmic end of that. How do we imitate and get that rhythmic groove that guitar players fall into so naturally and so easily on guitar? And to make a long story short, with strum bowing, what enables violin players to do that, string players to do that better, is to have a steady physical motion going in their arm the way guitar players strum. Because when you do that, what it does is it allows your body to move in a regular way, like bouncing, keeping time, being just closer to dance, the way we would dance if we were listening to music. When we're doing things like stopping and starting and slurring and doing things like this, and what happens is we have to physically, it makes it really hard to move rhythmically because we're stopping and starting and we're kind of shutting off the lower half of our body so that our arms can do these very complex things and our neck is like this. And all of that physical stuff is super important and is the problem. That's why we can't just get into an easy, we're like, well, how come guitar players can do this so easily? It sounds so natural. Because playing a guitar is a very natural thing to do, and you can move your body, you can dance while you're doing it, and most guitar players do. But it's very hard to do that when you're playing hard, difficult classical music on a stringed instrument. So one of the things about strum bowing is it's not that it dumbs it down, but if you figure out a way to play these rhythms with a consistent motor going here, it simply allows it suddenly frees up your whole body. And I think that is a game changer for authenticity in grooving, because you cannot groove unless your body is free to move like you would move as if you were just dancing to that music.
I'd like to add one thing to that too,
Yeah.
because I think that in addition to, well, I hear violin in everything. I walk around, I hear, oh, there should be a little violin in that. Whatever kind of timbre the violin may be making, but I definitely hear violin just walking around, even when I'm listening to the birds. Oh, they need a little violin. Um, but but the whole idea of the grooving and the moving, um, what I've noticed with your your approach, and what I've gained since I've been starting to work with your strum bowing and moving, I think it adds so much dimension to classical music. And I think that sometimes, you look at these early recordings and the way I was taught, you know, we stand still, balance, 2 feet. And you look at it, I saw a recording of Ruggiero Ricci the other day playing Paganini. Great recording. beautiful, incredible. But, boom, those feet were rock solid. And I just wonder how much of it may have just kind of evolved through a tradition of teaching. And it
A
can,
lot,
yeah. And so
a
it
lot.
can, we can flow in that area, in that arena that has been dubbed classical as well.
Yes. Yeah, it is so much in the pedagogy, and it gets, again, we were started out talking about this, it can be dogmatic and academic. And it's largely because playing stringed instruments is so damn hard.
Yeah.
It's just not as easy as playing a guitar. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mark. I know you're a guitar player. It doesn't mean that playing guitar really well is easy. Being a great guitar player is incredibly difficult. Um, but just physically playing violin, we have no frets. We're
Mhm.
dealing with, but we all know if we're all the folks on this call are string players, we know how hard it is to play, and that works against this naturalness
Mhm.
of physical naturalness. So I think it's really important for classical players if you want to get into this, if you're trying to play non-classical music, learn how to do some of these skills like ghosting and stuff like that, and keeping time with your bow on really easy stuff. Um, there's no shame in going to stuff that's really easy for you to do, because you're gonna be doing things that are very unusual for you, that might feel really weird, and against all the classical rules. I'm often have to keep reminding my students, different rules for different schools. What
Mhm.
works for classical music does not work for funk or for rock and roll, and you can't do the same things with your bow with distortion that you do when it's clean. And there's just different rules for all this stuff, and we sort of have to almost pull ourselves so far from our classical training that we've been programmed with, that we're doing something different. It's almost like we're learning how to play the clarinet now, or learning.
Mhm.
It's closer to learning how to play a percussion instrument now. So we're
Yeah.
just going to take these violins and pretend they're percussion instruments, and learn them from scratch.
Yeah.
Forget everything and approach it fresh. And sometimes that's just the easiest way to get started with this stuff.
And the ghost bowing, the ghosting the notes,
Yeah.
that has changed the way I bow anything now. It's like it opens up any kind of up bow, down bow, doesn't really matter because your bow's moving. It really changes a lot. I want to take a few more questions too, because
Yeah.
we have um, a lot of people on the call, and um, there are a lot
Yeah.
of violin players. So you don't have to be a violin player to ask a question. Anyone out there with a
Do you think strum bowing made you a better classical violinist?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I think yes. Yes. I think the Strumberg, as I mentioned, just it's made me a better teacher too. It's made me a better teacher and a better, I think, yes. Especially things like I was telling Tracy earlier, I was coaching Shostakovich Eighth Quartet, and just the verticalness sometimes of the way the bow was. I was not worried about sticking to a certain paradigm of stylistic playing, and I thought, okay, can just open it all up, and then doing certain things by Bartok, things like that. But even in very lyrical pieces too, it's made me feel different. I'm much more aware of feeling the subdivisions internally when I'm playing lyrical music. So yes, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that I discovered somewhere along the way was that any melody in classical music, um, I mean, this is not 100% true, but I would say 90 to 95% of melodies in classical music are over some kind of a rhythmic basis. There's some accompaniment. underneath it that has a groove of some kind or a rhythm of some kind, and that melody is sitting on top of it. And as violin players, especially more so than cellists, since we're sitting on the top and we're playing the melody and we're taught how to do this by our teachers, which is all about intonation, vibrato, phrasing, tone, bow control, all of these things. We're basically singing on our instrument. How many times have your teachers said, sing, sing? It's almost like we're teaching vocalists. Like, it's like opera, we're teaching how to breathe. That's like how to bow, and all of these things. But it's like we're learning the the top part of the top edge of the music without having any idea what's going on underneath it. Like we're sailing on the ocean and we're like, oh, the ocean is this wonderful flat thing that you can see a reflection of the sky in. And that's what the ocean is, having no understanding that there is that's happening underneath our boat. And I think if we think that, if we realize that a melody like, I'm just going to grab my fiddle real quick here. Whatever. If we're going like right, a Bach arioso, that there's an accompaniment underneath that's very steady, right? There's a continual part that's right? And there's a dance going on there. There's a pulse, right? So if we play that melody, we need to be cognizant of where it's sitting in relationship to that pulse. Do we want to be right with it? Do we want to be behind it? Do we want to be ahead of it? What are we doing? Are we pulling, slowing down, pushing? And that push and pull that you'll hear pop vocalists do over, a groove or something, is we need to be more aware of what we're sitting on top of and what that groove is. All melodies are in relationship to a groove. They are not, they don't exist in their own little bubble. And that's just something that nobody ever taught me, as a violinist. So.
Well, based on that analogy of the ocean, just that analogy right there just speaks volumes of how great a teacher you are.
Oh, thank you.
Those kind of analogies, they don't just come from any old fool out there. That was pretty deep.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see we have Kara sent me a message. I used to scratch, scrub, and scream.
Actually, did you get a direct message?
I did, and I'm reading it out loud. So sorry about that, Kara.
Well, because there is a former Lewis Kaplan student on this call, and I think you may have spotted that person.
Well, Kara, is it okay if I address this publicly? Because it's yes, it's a good question. Basically, it's about getting frustrated practicing. Kara, do you mind being a little more specific about what was frustrating? Was it trying to play non-classical stuff or playing classical stuff? Any more details about that I can use to guide? Maybe not. Well, I'll just talk about frustration, which I'm very familiar with. Yeah, it's, a lot of this stuff, it's a little bit like riding a bike. It can be really seem impossible. I don't know if we all remember, like when we were trying to learn how to ride a bike and we thought we were basically going to die before we ever learned, because we would fall and break our knees and break our arms and but eventually we got it. And then we just totally forgot that we ever didn't know how to ride a bike, and it became completely automatic. And that's where a lot of things are, I think, with string playing. They seem absolutely impossible. Just practicing hard passages. of course, we all know as classical musicians, slow it down. Anything that you can play slow, you can play fast. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take you to get there. Uh, and the same thing is true with playing this non-classical rhythmic stuff, especially with rhythmic stuff, because we want that rhythmic accuracy a lot of the time. And here's a little pro tip for rhythm playing, and it's very non-classical. In fact, I like to say that I'm the only string teacher you will ever hear utter these words, which is use less bow. Right? All my life, I was told to use more bow, to play louder with a project. Again, it's like we're training opera singers. And when we're playing rhythms, the less bow we use, the less our arm is moving, the more accurate it's going to be. And when you're playing rhythm, if you have a rhythm that's like, which I love to use as an example, I'm playing it right now with As It Comes bowing, right? Which I would kind of never do if I wanted this to groove. First of all, I would play it with ghosting. And that's an example. That's what strum bowing is. It's just basically keeping this motor going. But let's say for a second I was going to do it the hard way. If I try to get that, if I'm using a lot of bow, trying to project to the back of the hall, and I try to play it twice that speed, it's going to be crazy. It's not going to be in time. It's going to sound ridiculous. But I can play this like this, and even with this awkward stop and start bowing, I can play it twice as fast because I'm using less bow. But so that's one thing. I think there's a lot of baggage that we carry around as classical musicians that become very frustrating to us, because why can't I do this? Because you know what? It's not natural a lot of times. Do what, it's more natural physically. Work with your physics of your body. If you're going to play something that fast, use less bow, use a microphone. We have microphones now. We're no longer in the, 18th century.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I'm saying all these blasphemous classical things. So,
No, that's great. I
my
love that. I love the less bow thing. I do remember I had a coaching with Bernie Greenhouse and on scherzos, in trios and stuff. And he'd always say, less bow, less bow, less bow, less
Oh,
bow.
really?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
the only way you'll be able to play it cleanly. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm
And he
not
was
the
all
only.
about, and I remember even Brahms piano trios always doing this with the rhythm. Just don't mess with the rhythm. Everyone wants to do all this stuff.
Yes,
He was a
yes.
Beaux-Arts trio for years, and they're just, and
You
he,
know, I I'm glad you reminded me of that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no,
Yeah,
but
I had a chance to work with a guy named Harry Zaratsian, who is long since gone, but he was a wonderful violist and just a dynamic teacher. And he was teaching us the Beethoven Archduke Trio.
yeah,
And he was trying to bring out, and this really influenced, I think it had a lot of influence on my whole strumboing stuff. He wanted to bring out how militaristic it was musically, how it had this march, like, ba-dum-da-dum, ba-ba-ba-ba. No, that's Schubert.
oh,
What's
that
the
is
first
Schubert,
Schubert?
yeah. Da dee da da da
Dum,
da
bum,
da
ba-da-da-da.
da da.
Yeah, which sounds like a fight song. It sounds
Right,
like
it does.
it sounds like
Football.
on
We're ready to
Wisconsin
go
or
out on the
something.
football field, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
especially the way
and
I sang it.
and but he was telling us to respect the rhythm,
Yeah. Mhm.
so which is something I think classical. It's funny, classical musicians have a hard time with anything that disrespects the composers that we put on pedestals and stuff like that. But we are very quick to ignore what I think are very obvious grooves. And it's like,
Yeah.
why is there a rubato? There's no need to mess with you're weakening the music by messing with the rhythm too much. It doesn't need that.
Yeah.
So, it's a funny dichotomy.
Yeah. So we have a few questions in the chat or
Yes.
observations. I know
Yes.
Amanda, Aminata, what would you
Yeah.
say is available when musicians play Indian music or ragas while they're seated on the ground? I recently we went to a really cool club in Philadelphia. A friend of mine was playing bass, and we heard a Carnatic violinist sitting on the ground the whole time.
Yeah.
So, so what would you say is
Interesting. You mean
available?
in terms of the movement and
I
stuff like
guess the
that?
movement,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's an interesting question. For one thing, when violinists in that tradition, they put their scroll on their heel,
yeah.
which grounds it and makes it really easy to slide around, do all those shifts and slides, which are often more than a whole step, ornaments. Those kind of things like that. So that it fixes the whole issue of holding, your violin like this. It's much more natural to just sit and put it on your foot like that.
Mhm.
But here's what I want to do here is use this as an opportunity to make this distinction between playing rhythm and playing melody, because these are two different things. And a good way, to highlight this is in a lot of rock bands, you'll have a rhythm guitar player and a lead guitar player, and they're doing two very different functions. The lead guitar player is essentially playing melodically and playing like a singer in a way, is sort of an extension of the lead singer. The rhythm player is in the rhythm section. He's keeping time with the drummer and the bass player and playing a groove. And when we're playing rhythm, we are subdividing the beat by nature. That is the act of playing rhythm is a matter of subdividing. The more we keep that subdivision in our body physicalized, and the more we can move our body physically to reinforce that, the better that rhythm is going to be, and the more likely people are to dance to that. But that's a completely different job from the singer job, from the melody job, and which is what mostly classical violin playing is about, since it's about playing the melodies to things, and not playing the rhythm. It's usually the viola player and the second violin player and the cellist who are playing the rhythm parts. So the Carnatic violinist is generally playing a melodic part and improvising
Right.
melodically. And the rules of strumboing, the basic rule, which is just keep a motor going in your arm, that just does not apply to that, because we're slurring, we're not playing a rhythm, we're playing a melody.
And that
So
makes total sense.
so that's kind of
Yeah.
what that's about. And Lauren has a
Yep.
question. Let's read this, because I think on the replay sometimes the chat
Do you
may
want to
not
read
be
it, or do you want me to read it?
Sure,
You
I'll
might
read
read better than I do.
it.
I don't
When
have
you
my
get-
glasses on.
Okay. When you get back around to a gap in topics, many clean electric violins or electrified acoustic violins to me sound like they have a cold. What's a setup that can mitigate this? Yes, they have a nasal sound, and that is the nature of a piezo pickup, and that's what I have on my electric here. For instance, here's an electric 6-string violin. The bridge has individual pickups under each string, and that's how it's reproducing the sound. It's hearing the vibration of the string on the bridge. I have an effect on here. Let me take that off real quick.
I was hoping this question would lead to this, by the way.
um, and there is a certain electric sound that is just going to be part of this equation. You can exaggerate it with things like distortion and effects, or you can try to make it sound as clean as possible. Let me find a clean sound here real quick. Here's a pretty clean sound. And I work really hard to try to take that nasal quality out of it. And it's a matter of EQing it really carefully. EQ is just the tone control, equalization. So often it's those mid-range frequencies around 600, 5 or 600 hertz, that if you just pull that out a little bit, it won't have so much of a honky sound to it. But it also is depends on the kind of pickup. This is a pickup, a brand of pickup that I've been using for, I don't want to tell you how many years, um, since the 80s. And because I just think it has the cleanest, most natural sound. But there are a lot of pickups out there that have a very honky nasal sound. And if you're starting with that, like starting with a less wonderful tone to begin with, you have to start trying to really fix it with EQ and different choices of amps, choices of speakers, and all of those kinds of things. And I mean, I've spent so many hours of my life that it amounts to years of my life working with different amps, trying different amps, going to music stores and trying them, buying pedals, working with them, returning them, buying different ones. It's just was an endless process for many years. It's gotten to the point where now I kind of know what works for me and I've got stuff. But even still, my setup changes every couple of years. Different pedals. Went to a laptop based thing, and that search for a good sound is a never ending quest. Uh, you know, and it's a time consuming and money consuming process. But and then when at the end of the day, it just sounds like, oh well, that sounds the way it should sound. It's like it's the way I think of good wines. It's like good wines just don't have any of the bad, right? When you have a cheap wine, it tastes too sweet, or it's too vinegary, or it's whatever. Good wines they don't have none of the bad stuff. It's just the good stuff.
Well, I I hate to say this. I know you have a hard stop today,
Oh,
and
I
so we're
do,
getting
yes.
really close to 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up to
Yes.
anyone, and maybe we can do like a boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. We
If
have any
anyone has other
last minute
questions.
questions?
Yeah, because we have an interesting group of people on here today.
Yeah, I see some of my friends from Strumboing World. Victor
Nice.
Wynn is here.
And I know we did have a drummer on that I know, or the father of the person that I work with. I'm not sure if he's still here. So, and I would like to encourage people to sign up for your Strumboing.
Oh, thank you.
So maybe could you
Oh,
put it
should I
right
put a
in the
link?
chat?
I can put a link in the chat. And
And maybe if we don't have any more questions, or if we do, maybe in the meantime. Oh, thanks. There, Tracy just put the Strumboing in the chat.
in the chat, and it's for those who can't see the chat, it's just strumboinggrooveacademy.com. One word, Strumboing Groove Academy.
Yes, and I highly recommend it. And I would
Thank you.
love to just hear a little bit of some like
Something,
demonstration
something.
of Tracy Silverman doing what he does.
Well, I'll just kind of show you a little bit of strumboing, like in a piece of music. Victor just says, "Hi, I just listened to your I Wish again last night. I always put a smile on my face." All right, you know what? I'm going to play a little bit I Wish for you. That's a perfect, thank you, Victor. Perfect demonstration of strumboing, because I'm playing, it's a Stevie Wonder tune, kind of funky. And the way I do this is not, it doesn't sound like Stevie Wonder, but I think it's got a little bit of funk groove to it anyway. And I like to demonstrate to folks, if I were to play this like a classical violinist would, a typical string player, with as it comes bowing, it would sound like this. Right? It's missing so much. And it's maybe not even rhythmically accurate. But as soon as I add this motor and I'm going, all those little ticky notes that you don't even realize you're hearing. And I can move my body like this. I can improvise around it, change it around a little bit, what I call micro improvisation. You're just, variations of the rhythm. If you got a loop pedal, you can loop it and then add more. And if you got a wah-wah, whoops, the sound in there, wah-wah. Hang on one second, let me get to a wah-wah sound. When I'm playing rhythmically like this, I'm going to play like a rhythmic solo. But then if I want to play a melodic solo, different rules. Right? I'm not keeping time. So anyway, just a little quick demo.
So, Wawa, not just serving up good coffee.
Philly area joke.
That's a Philly area joke, right?
Yes, sir.
Wow. Thank you, Tracy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Great to meet you. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah. Thank you again for joining us today and your generosity in the whole music world and what you're doing. Just keep it evolving.
Yes, and if just one last thing, if you're trying the strumboing, you're not getting it right away. It does not. It's like riding a bike. It does not take that long to get it. You just got to get the feeling. It's helpful to have somebody show you how to do it, though.
Well, here he is, right there.
Otherwise. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.